Welcome to our discussion today as we delve into a fascinating yet unsettling interpretation of one of Britain's most iconic ancient sites. We're exploring the work of Joe Bandel, specifically his essay, The Massacre at Stonehenge, which challenges many conventional views.
That's right, Jake. Bandel begins his exploration by referencing occultist Dion Fortune's vivid description of Stonehenge from her 1930 book, Glastonbury, Avalon of the Heart. Fortune wrote, quote, "The soul of the place reeks of primitive man, his blood sacrifices, and his dark fears. On every hand lie the barrows of his burying and the tumuli of his sacrifices." End quote. She paints a very grim picture, describing the stones as brooding over memories, heavy with ancient fear and death.
That's quite a stark image, and it immediately sets a somber tone. It sounds like she sees Stonehenge not as a place of spiritual awakening, but one of inherent violence. She contrasts it sharply with Avebury, which she calls a temple of the sun, but Stonehenge is a temple of blood, cold and sinister to this day.
Precisely. This dark mystery of Stonehenge has led many to believe it was the heart of Druid civilization, but Bandel points out that Druids existed across mainland Europe, not just Britain and Ireland. He traces their linguistic roots, along with all other European languages, back to Proto-Indo-European, first spoken in the Pontic-Caspian steppes between 4500 and 2500 BCE.
So, the origins of the Druids are much broader than just the British Isles, stretching back to these ancient nomadic cultures. And it was in this very region, around 2500 BCE, that horses were first tamed, creating the world's first mounted warriors. How does that connect to Druid culture?
It's a critical link. These fierce mounted warriors, which included both men and women warriors, were nomadic traders. As they moved westward through Europe, they influenced the precursors of feudal society. Bandel suggests the roots of ancient Druidry must have emerged from these interactions. They retained doctrines like hospitality, offering food and shelter to travelers, and their societal structure, with castes like bards, ovates, and druids, mirrored what we see in modern society's divisions, like media, the medical professions, and the ruling class. The Romans aggressively suppressed them. Emperor Tiberius and Claudius actively sought to eradicate Druid culture in Gaul in the 1st century CE, and by the 2nd century it had largely vanished there. Many believe the Druids fled to Britain. What's also interesting is the disappearance of the Samothrace mysteries, which honored a warrior goddess, around 400 CE, the same time Druids largely disappeared. These mysteries had existed in Gaul for almost 1,000 years. Bandel, citing Carl A. P. Ruck, questions if this was a mere coincidence or a deeper connection.
It's hard to ignore that parallel timing. This suggests a systematic cultural destruction, but how do these early nomadic warriors connect to specific events in Britain, particularly Stonehenge?
Bandel brings in the Sarmatians, another horse-riding nomadic people from the Pontic steppe. The Romans encountered them and were so challenged by their mounted warfare that they eventually conscripted Sarmatian horsemen. In 175 CE, some 5,500 Sarmatians were stationed in Britain, serving in the Roman army. These warriors were distinctive. They flew a dragon standard and even worshipped a sword plunged into an earthen mound, which some scholars like R. Brzezinski and M. Mielcharek propose might be the origin of the King Arthur legend.
That's a direct link to the Arthurian legends, a major claim. So these Sarmatians, who were essentially foreign mercenaries, might have brought their own Druid-like beliefs to Britain, and their presence eventually influenced foundational British myths like King Arthur and even the lineage of figures like Uther Pendragon?
Precisely. Bandel suggests the legendary Uther Pendragon, whose standard was also a dragon, was associated with these Sarmatian horse warriors. He speculates that Idle, the Earl of Gloucester, a figure mentioned in the account of the massacre, might also have descended from this lineage. This would explain why Idle was seen as having a troublesome lineage and wasn't considered a rightful king by other British nobility, despite his importance.
This leads us to the heart of Bandel's essay, the Massacre at Stonehenge. How do we know about this event, and what is its significance?
The primary source is the Gottadin, an ancient song notoriously difficult to translate. Edward Davies, in 1809, dedicated extensive effort to translating the Gottadin and other Druid songs, believing they chronicled the Feast of the Long Knives and the Massacre at Stonehenge. Davies determined the Gottadin was a compilation of short songs, and through meticulous research, he placed the Massacre at Stonehenge. Bandel is retelling this story, providing his own insights.
So Davies was essentially a historical detective, piecing together this ancient tragedy from fragmented verses and lost names. What was the setup for this massacre?
The Britons were under attack from Picts, Scots, and Saxons, so they elected Vortigern as High King. Hengist, a Saxon, and his brother Horsa arrived, and Vortigern, seeking peace, allowed them to settle on the Isle of Thanet in exchange for military aid. Hengist then manipulated Vortigern, persuading him to bring more Saxons, marrying his daughter Rowena to Vortigern, and eventually gaining the Kingdom of Kent. The Saxons grew in number, alarming the Britons, who then elected Vortigern's son, Vortimer, as High King to drive them out.
A classic tale of political intrigue and escalating tensions. Vortimer successfully drove the Saxons back, but it seems that victory was short-lived.
Indeed, Rowena poisoned Vortimer, leading to Vortigern's re-election as High King, despite protests. Hengist then returned with a massive army of 300,000 men. Under a flag of truce, Hengist proposed a meeting at Stonehenge for the Beltane feast on May 1, 473 CE. Both sides would bring 360 unarmed warriors and leaders to negotiate.
Unarmed, in peace. This sounds like a recipe for betrayal, especially given Hengist's past actions. What was the secret plan?
It was a treacherous scheme. Vortigern secretly colluded with Hengist. The plan was for Hengist's men to bring hidden weapons to the feast. The loyal champions of the deceased Vortimer, who had opposed Vortigern, were to be targeted, identified by purple robes. Other nobles would be ransomed. Stonehenge itself wasn't just the stone circle, it was a fortified enclosure, a community with wooden walls, and thousands would be present for the important Beltane festival.
So it was a full-scale community, not just a ceremonial site, and the meeting wasn't even at the stones, but a bit away on the Kirkus. What was Idol's role in this unfolding disaster?
Idol, the Earl of Gloucester, was the high priest, president of the circle and knight of the enclosure. He was tasked with hosting the feast, keeping everyone supplied with food and drink. Bandel suggests Idol might have been the only sober person there, and speculates his Sarmatian lineage kept him from the main negotiations, perhaps as a way to keep him away while still giving him a place of honor. The bards were to be the entertainers.
That's a chilling detail, the host being the only sober one while treachery brews. How did the massacre itself unfold?
Hengist's men secretly wore long knives in their sleeves. The seating was arranged so that a Saxon and a Briton sat alternating at each table. During the feasting, when everyone was thoroughly drunk, Hengist gave the signal by suddenly killing the chief bard who was entertaining them. Chaos erupted. Each Saxon plunged his blade into the Briton next to him. The champions in purple robes were specifically targeted. 360 of Vortigern's nobles and chieftains were savagely murdered.
That's an horrific betrayal. And Vortigern, who had colluded in this, was captured?
Yes, he was captured and forced to surrender his properties, along with Norfolk and Sussex, to Hengist. Idol, however, was the only Briton noble who survived the initial onslaught, killing over 70 men. He escaped, sounded the alarm, and ignited a fire to block the fortified avenue, preventing the Saxons from entering the temple proper. He then fought to defend the temple, but eventually, Hengist returned with his full army, slaughtering the remaining bards and plundering the temple.
So this massacre wasn't just a localized event, it led to the utter destruction of Stonehenge as a living, sacred Druid center. Bandel calls this the death blow to the Druid religion.
It was. Along with events like St. Patrick burning over 300 sacred Druid manuscripts in Ireland during the same period, this massacre at Stonehenge effectively ended the organized Druid religion. As the Godedin recounts, quote, "Morian defended the blessed sanctuary. She is transpierced." End quote. The magical power of the Druids was broken. All the Druids, ovates, and bards present were slaughtered.
And the connection to King Arthur? Bandel implies Edel became the legendary figure.
He believes the Celts and Druids, in their tradition of fantastical stories, transformed Edel, the sole survivor who later helped capture and behead Hengist, into the immortal King Arthur. The Knights of the Round Table, he suggests, were those mounted champions wearing purple robes who were treacherously murdered at the feast. The missing temple treasure was the Holy Grail, the most sacred object of the Druid religion, which they believed Arthur would one day return to find.
That's a powerful reinterpretation, weaving the origins of a foundational myth into a very real, very brutal historical event. It suggests the Arthurian legends are not just tales of chivalry, but a coded memory of immense loss and cultural destruction. Thank you for walking us through Joe Bandel's compelling re-examination of Stonehenge and its grim history.
It was my pleasure. It certainly offers a different perspective on a site we often romanticize.
If you found this discussion thought-provoking, share this episode with someone else who enjoys exploring hidden histories.